A new life was growing. For Ariel Neville's, the quiet flutters of movement inside her weren't just the signs of a developing child, they were the promise of a future. A future where she would become a mother. A future where she would finally hold her baby, feel their tiny fingers wrap around hers, hear their first cries, watch them take their first steps. She had imagined it all. The late-night feedings, the first words, the endless love she would pour into her child. It was a future she had already begun to build. A future she had already chosen. But behind the walls of the home she shared with her boyfriend, Vidal Wegner, something was shifting. Something unspoken, something dangerous. Or so it seemed. Because while Ariel was planning for a life with her child, the man who had helped create that life was thinking of something else entirely. And his plan didn't include fatherhood. It didn't include diapers, lullabies, or bedtime stories. In fact, it didn't include Ariel at all. We like to believe we know the people closest to us. That we can see the signs. That we'd recognize the moment love turns into something else, something dark, something violent. But what if it doesn't happen all at once? What if it builds slowly, over time, hidden beneath everyday conversations, buried under half-hearted reassurances? What if, by the time you realize the danger, it's already too late? For Ariel, there was no warning that the man she trusted, the man she had shared her life with, would one day become the reason it ended. There was no last-minute escape, no desperate plea that would change his mind. Because by the time she knew just how much he resented her pregnancy, just how much he wished it would all go away, he had already made his decision. She had chosen life. But Wegner had chosen something else. And in the space of a single moment, in the heat of an argument that should have ended in words, not violence, he wrapped his hands around her throat and squeezed. Until she stopped struggling. Until she stopped breathing. Until there was nothing left of the future she had dreamed of. Until there was no future at all. Ariel Neville should be alive today. She should be picking out baby names, feeling the kicks of her unborn child, planning for the day she would bring them into the world. Instead, her body was found lifeless, the child she carried gone before they ever had a chance to live. And the man responsible? He didn't run. He didn't hide. He sat in a jail cell and spoke words that chilled everyone who heard them. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't remorseful. He wasn't broken by what he had done. No. Instead, he said something far more terrifying. Something that revealed just how cold, just how heartless, just how calculated this crime truly was. She chose this. It didn't have to be this way. But was that true? Or was this something he had always been capable of? Had this murder been inevitable? Was it planned? And more importantly, could it have been stopped? Tonight, we don't just tell the story of a murder. We uncover the moments leading up to it. The warning signs. The escalating tensions. The final breaking point. Because this is more than just a crime. This is the story of a woman who wanted to live, who fought for her child, and who lost everything at the hands of the one person who should have protected her. This is pregnancy tragedy, betrayal, murder, and a life lost. Ariel Neville was more than just a name on a news report. More than just a headline. More than just a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. A woman with ambitions, strength, and an unshakable determination to build a life she could be proud of. But most of all, she was a woman with love to give, a love that, in the end, cost her everything. Born and raised in Valparaiso, Indiana, Ariel had always been known for her resilience. She wasn't the type to back down from a challenge. She didn't shy away from hard work, and she never expected things to come easy. If there was something she wanted, she worked for it. And she worked hard. It was a mindset that defined her in everything she did. Her career was proof of that. Ariel was a union millwright, a job dominated by men, physically demanding, requiring precision, patience, and sheer willpower. But Ariel didn't just do the job, she excelled in it. She built, she repaired, she handled machinery with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She was proud of her work, proud of the calluses on her hands, the sweat on her skin. To her, every project was a mark of her strength, a sign that she could stand on her own. But Ariel wasn't just about work. She had a heart for service, a sense of duty that went beyond herself. That's why she joined the Illinois Army Reserves. She wanted to do more, to be a part of something bigger. Her dedication wasn't just about discipline, it was about purpose. She was the kind of person who showed up, who followed through, who didn't quit when things got hard. She believed in pushing forward, no matter the obstacle. And then, something happened that would change everything. Something that made her world feel bigger, more meaningful than ever before. She found out she was pregnant. For some, an unplanned pregnancy can bring fear, uncertainty, doubt. But for Ariel, it was different. It was a moment of overwhelming joy. A dream she had always held close to her heart was finally becoming real. She was going to be a mother. She was going to create life, nurture it, raise it. This was what she had always wanted. And nothing, was going to take that away from her. In her mind, she was already picturing it. The little hands reaching for hers. The soft cries in the middle of the night. The laughter, the love, the future. She had spent her life proving she could do anything, and this was going to be her greatest challenge yet. But she was ready. More than ready. She embraced it with open arms. But not everyone shared her excitement. Vidal Wegner had been a part of Ariel's life for some time. To the outside world, they were just another couple, navigating life together, figuring things out. But what no one knew was that behind closed doors, there was an imbalance. A shift. A silent tension that neither of them spoke about but both of them felt. Ariel was a woman who knew what she wanted. She had drive, ambition, and a deep sense of responsibility. Wegner, on the other hand, was different. Less certain. Less steady. To him, commitment felt like a weight, something that held him down rather than lifted him up. And when Ariel told him she was pregnant, that weight became something unbearable. Maybe she expected hesitation at first. Maybe she thought he just needed time to process it. After all, a baby was a big change. But she believed in them, believed that once the shock wore off, he would see what she saw, an opportunity, a future, something to be cherished. But Wegner didn't see a future. He saw an ending. An ending to the life he wanted. An ending to his freedom. An ending to his control. And that realization began to fester. In the beginning, the signs were small. A change in his tone. A quiet resentment in his voice. A distance that hadn't been there before. Maybe she noticed it. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she wanted so badly to believe in their future that she ignored what was right in front of her. Because that's the thing about love, it blinds us. It makes us see what we want to see. Even when the truth is staring us in the face. But the truth was this, Vidal Wegner didn't want to be a father. And the longer the pregnancy continued, the more that truth became impossible to ignore. Ariel was not the type of woman to live in fear. She had built a life on strength, on perseverance, on standing her ground. So when the argument started, maybe she brushed them off. Maybe she told herself it was normal. That he would come around. That eventually, he would accept the reality of their child. But he didn't. Instead, the distance grew. The tension thickened. And the man who had once been her partner now felt like something else entirely. Something colder. Something unfamiliar. Did she notice? Did she feel it in the way he looked at her? In the way he avoided certain conversations? In the way his presence, once comforting, began to feel like a weight pressing down on her chest. Or did she push those feelings aside, telling herself that things would get better? That they had to get better? Because that's the thing about warning signs. They don't always look like warnings. Sometimes they look like they are silent. Sometimes they look like indifference. Sometimes they look like a person you used to love standing in front of you, looking at you, but feeling like a stranger. And by the time you realize what they really mean, it's already too late. Ariel Neville should be alive today. She should be preparing for motherhood, counting down the days until she could meet her baby. She should be picking out names, decorating a nursery, feeling those tiny kicks as her child grew inside her. Instead, her name became a part of something unthinkable. Her life, cut short by the very man who should have been standing beside her. Her baby, never given the chance to take a breath, to cry, to live. But how did it happen? How did a man who once claimed to love her become the reason she lost everything? Was it a sudden snap of rage? Or had it been building all along? That answer comes next. For Ariel Neville, becoming a mother was a dream. But for Vidal Wegner, it was a nightmare. And in the weeks following the pregnancy announcement, that nightmare began to consume him. At first, things seemed normal. There was no immediate explosion, no dramatic fallout. Maybe there was hesitation, maybe some uncertainty, but Ariel believed that, in time, Wegner would adjust. After all, they were in this together. Weren't they? But something was changing. Slowly, the warmth in their conversations faded. The excitement Ariel felt was not reflected in his words. When she spoke about doctor's appointments, he responded with silence. When she mentioned baby names, he barely reacted. And then, the silence turned into something else, something far more disturbing. Wegner didn't want this baby. And he made that very clear. It started with subtle suggestions. Small comments. Are you sure you want to go through with this? This isn't the right time. We're not ready. But soon, those comments became demands. You need to get rid of it. This will ruin everything. You have to do this. The pressure was relentless. Friends later recalled that Ariel had confided in them about the growing tension. Wegner was insistent. He didn't want to be a father. He didn't want this child. And he wanted her to end it. But Ariel refused. This wasn't a decision she took lightly. She had thought about it, considered every possibility. But in the end, she knew what she wanted. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Wegner didn't see it that way. To him, Ariel's decision wasn't just about the baby. It was about control. She had taken away his choice. And that, more than anything else, was something he couldn't accept. The tension in their home became unbearable. The arguments grew louder. The distance between them widened. Friends and family began to notice the change in Wegner's demeanor, his mood swings, his unpredictable anger, the way he seemed more withdrawn, more irritable. It was as if something inside him was boiling, waiting to explode. In the messages he sent her, his words became sharper. More cutting. More desperate. You're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're doing. This is going to ruin everything. But Ariel didn't back down. She wouldn't be bullied into a decision she didn't want to make. This was her child. Her future. And she was willing to fight for it. And that was what sealed her fate. No one knows exactly when Wegner made his decision. Maybe it was after yet another argument, when he realized she would never give in. Maybe it was in a moment of silence, when he sat alone with his thoughts, stewing in his resentment. Or maybe he had always known. But one thing was certain, by January 2025, his mind was made up. If he couldn't make Ariel change her decision, he would end it another way. It wasn't an act of passion. It wasn't a moment of lost control. It was a choice. A calculated decision. A solution to a problem that, in his eyes, had only one answer. But Ariel? She never saw it coming. January 2025. A quiet night in Spring Hill, Tennessee. Ariel Neville's was in the home she shared with Vidal Wegner, the same walls that had once held laughter, conversations about the future, the early excitement of a pregnancy. But on this night, that home became something else entirely. A place of violence. A place of finality. A place where love turned into something unrecognizable. No one knows exactly what set it off. Maybe it was a word, a look, something small that triggered everything that had been building inside of him. But what we do know, is that Ariel never stood a chance. In the hours leading up to the murder, tensions in the home reached their peak. It wasn't the first time they had argued about the baby, but this time, there was no coming back from it. Wegner had made it clear, he didn't want this child. He wanted Ariel to change her mind. And Ariel, she stood her ground, just as she always had. She wasn't afraid of him. Maybe she should have been. What happened next was a moment of sheer brutality. Somewhere in that house, in the middle of what should have been just another argument, Wegner crossed a line that could never be undone. His hands that had once touched her with love, with familiarity, tightened around her throat. He squeezed. Harder. Harder. At first, maybe she fought. Maybe she gasped for breath, tried to pry his hands away. Maybe she tried to scream, but nothing came out. The oxygen slipped from her lungs. The reality of what was happening was setting in too late. Maybe she thought, just for a second, that he would stop. That he would realize what he was doing. That he would let go. But he didn't. Seconds stretched into eternity. Her body fought against his grip, but he was stronger. Determined. Unrelenting. And then, at some point, she stopped struggling. She stopped moving. Ariel Neville's, the woman who had built her life on resilience, who had fought so hard to become a mother, was gone. And with her, the child she had dreamed of. Most killers panic. Most run. Most try to cover their tracks. But not Vidal Wegner. No. He didn't flee. He didn't try to hide what he had done. He sat with it. Lived in it. Let the weight of what he had just done settle into the silence of the room. And when the authorities arrived, he didn't break down. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't claim it was an accident. Instead, he said something so cold, so devoid of humanity, that it sent chills through those who heard it. She chose this. It didn't have to be this way. A statement not of remorse. Not of regret. But of blame. In his mind, he had been forced into this. In his mind, it was Ariel's fault. But was it? Or had this always been his plan? The crime scene told its own story. A body found lifeless. A pregnancy cut short. And a man who, despite everything, seemed disturbingly calm. But justice was coming. And this story was far from over. It didn't take long for police to zero in on Vidal Wegner as the primary suspect. The crime scene told its own story. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. The struggle had been contained, intimate, violent, and personal. This wasn't the work of a stranger. This was the work of someone who had been close to her. Someone who had planned this. Someone who had wanted this. And then, there was Wegner himself. In the hours after the murder, his demeanor was cold, detached. There was no panic, no attempt to feign innocence. If anything, he seemed relieved. As if, in his mind, he had solved the problem. As if, to him, this was nothing more than a necessary action. But necessary or not, the law saw it for what it was: murder. First-degree murder. Wegner wasn't just guilty in the eyes of investigators, he was guilty in the evidence that surrounded him. There was no cover-up. No attempt to destroy forensic proof. And perhaps the most damning piece of all? His own words. His confession wasn't one of sorrow. It wasn't a desperate attempt to explain his actions. It was cold. Matter of fact. He admitted to taking Ariel's life. He admitted to knowing exactly what he was doing. And most disturbing of all, he placed the blame on her. But investigators weren't satisfied with just a confession. They dug deeper. They scoured phone records, text messages, and witness testimonies. And what they found was even more disturbing. Wegner had been unraveling long before that night. The pressure to abort the baby had turned into threats, into rage, into something dangerous. Friends recalled conversations where Ariel expressed frustration, concern, but never fear. She never believed he would actually hurt her. But the investigators now knew what she hadn't: Wegner had been losing control for weeks. And when he finally realized Ariel would never back down, he decided to take matters into his own hands. With his confession, the witness statements, and forensic evidence all pointing directly at him, it didn't take long for police to make their move. Within days of Ariel's murder, Wegner was formally charged with first-degree murder and taken into custody. The moment he was placed in handcuffs, there was no fight. No struggle. No desperate pleas of innocence. He didn't ask why. He didn't protest. He simply accepted his fate, as if he had always known this was where his choices would lead him. But for Ariel's family, for those who loved her, his arrest was not justice. It was only the beginning of a long, painful road ahead. Because now, the fight was no longer about proving who had killed Ariel Nevils. That part was clear. The fight was about what would come next. About whether the man who had taken 2 lives in cold blood would face the punishment he truly deserved. The wheels of justice turned slowly. But for Ariel Nevils and her unborn child, they turned with purpose. The crime was brutal. The evidence was undeniable. And now, it was time for Vidal Wegner to face the consequences of what he had done. Inside the courtroom, there was no escaping the weight of his actions. Every detail was laid bare: the mounting pressure he placed on Ariel to terminate her pregnancy, the cold and calculated way he ended her life, and the chilling lack of remorse he displayed afterward. There were no excuses. No mitigating circumstances. No justifications that could soften the reality of what he had done. Wegner sat expressionless as prosecutors described, in harrowing detail, the final moments of Ariel's life. They recounted the months of psychological torment he had subjected her to, the growing rage, and the premeditated decision to end her life when she refused to submit to his demands. This was not a crime of passion. It was not a moment of lost control. It was murder, deliberate, intentional, and inescapably cruel. For Ariel's family, reliving her final days was excruciating. They had lost more than a daughter, more than a sister, more than a friend. They had lost an entire future, one filled with possibilities, milestones, and a love that had been stolen from them far too soon. When the time came for victim impact statements, the courtroom fell silent. One by one, Ariel's loved ones stood before the judge, their voices shaking, their words heavy with grief. They spoke of a woman full of promise, full of love, a woman who should be here today, raising her child, living the life she had fought so hard for. But instead, they stood in a courtroom, forced to relive the nightmare of losing her. Her mother's words were among the most heartbreaking. Ariel was my baby. And she was going to have a baby of her own. But now all I have left are memories. I will never hold my grandchild. I will never see Ariel smile again. And no sentence will ever bring her back. There wasn't a single dry eye in the courtroom. Except for one. Vidal Wegner sat stone-faced, unmoved, as if he were nothing more than an observer in his own trial. A man who had taken everything from Ariel's family and felt nothing in return. But the law did not share his indifference. After weeks of testimony, after witness statements, forensic analysis, and chilling confessions, the jury reached a decision. Vidal Wegner was found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was severe. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. He would never walk free again. Never have the chance to hurt another person. Never again be in control. For some, it was justice. But for Ariel's family, there would never be true justice. Because justice would mean having her back. Justice would mean hearing her laugh again, seeing her child grow up, watching her live the life she had dreamed of. And that was something no courtroom could ever give them. Ariel Neville's was taken too soon. But her story does not end with her death. It continues in the voices of those who loved her, in the fight for domestic violence awareness, in the conversations about reproductive coercion and the dangers that come when control turns to violence. Her name will not be forgotten. Her story will not fade. And the lesson left behind, the warning that no one should ignore the red flags, that no one should underestimate the depths of another's desperation, will stand as a reminder to those who find themselves in similar situations. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please seek help. You are not alone. Do you believe the punishment fits the crime? Was justice truly served for Ariel and her unborn child? Or should the system have done more? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in keeping these conversations alive. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And if you or someone you know is in a dangerous situation, please seek help. No one should have to face this alone.